Welcome to the July 2nd Arlington County Transportation Commission. Obviously, we are in a little different format from our regular setting. This is broadcasted in Teams. For first item is citizen comment on matters not on the agenda, and we have no speakers for item 1. Item 2 is the capital improvement plan, the CIP. This is a 1 year for 2021. Dennis? I think you're on mute, Dennis.
There we go. Good evening, members of the commission. It's a pleasure to be here with you in this virtual meeting. And I am going to run through a very brief PowerPoint presentation on the county manager's proposed 1 year CIP for transportation. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Let's see, there it is. And let me go back. Okay, can everyone see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, so brief overview of the county manager's proposed 1 year CIP. We are looking at a 1 year CIP, which is about $155 million for transportation. It is largely funded with previously approved funds that will advance established, fully funded projects. It is 1 year due to the extreme conditions that we're working under with the COVID-19 pandemic. It has both short and medium-term economic and financial impacts, not all of which are known. So we're still working through what it means for county revenue, including our dedicated transportation sources, both short and medium term. But then it also is affecting our funding partners at the regional level and the state level. So next is, what are the guiding principles that are laid out in the county manager's FY21 CIP? The first is to continue projects that are already underway, and there are many in the transportation portfolio. It includes the whole west end of Columbia Pike. It includes the reconstruction of the bus to rail transfer facility in Boston. It's rebuilding the Lee and Glebe intersection and approaching sidewalks, and also making improvements to Pershing Drive. It prioritizes projects that address failing and end-of-life infrastructure. We have some bridge conditions that are failing that need to be addressed, and we also have to make investments in technology. A third priority was to meet timeline commitments of our projects so as not to put existing grant funding at risk. And we do have an enormous amount of grant funding in our program, a lot in the transit part of our portfolio in particular. And then finally, the county manager and the county board launched Division Zero. We're in the middle of producing an action plan that hopefully we'll take to the board at the end of this calendar year. And there is also some funding for street safety improvements to get a jump start on implementing that plan. So first, the Transportation Complete Streets portfolio. And again, this is just FY21 funding. The actual program is much larger. So you'll see $7.6 million for bridge renovation. Principally, this is for the county's contribution towards the West Glebe Bridge, which is in real need of replacement, but there are other bridges in the pipeline. We have construction currently underway on the west end of Columbia Pike, and the remaining sections finishing design and right-of-way acquisition. We have a lot of existing work in the Crystal City, Pentagon City, Potomac Yard area of the county. We have complete streets projects, such as I mentioned with Lee and Glebe, that are in construction. Boundary Channel Drive is a project that we have partnered with VDOT and VDOT will be issuing a design build procurement to build out that project. Then 9.1 million for traffic signals and streetlights, and 3 million for the capital bike share program. I want to pause for a moment to talk about maintenance and specifically paving. There's $11.3 million for paving in this FY21 budget, 8.5 million for calendar year 2021. This is a 30% decline from the current calendar year, and it really is due to the scarcity of GEO-bond capacity. We believe, though, that this will allow us to maintain the paving index if the funding comes back in 2022. And then there's $1.7 million for ongoing bridge maintenance. So the bond referenda for this fall will have $7 million for paving and $64 million for bridge maintenance and bridge renovation. Going over to the transit side, we have active work on developing an art operation and maintenance facility. This is just ongoing funding for the design portion of that. We have a number of transit stations on the west end of Columbia Pike under construction right now. So this is this FY21 increment of that program. As I mentioned, we have Ballston Multimodal has gone into construction in the month of June. And so this is the funding that is needed for FY21. We hope to push Pentagon City's second elevator into construction towards the end of this calendar year. And then we have funding for ongoing metro station design work, both in Crystal City and Ballston. And then finally on this page, just ongoing work to improve the accessibility of our bus stops. And then lastly, I just wanted to show you an appendix slide on paving. So this shows you that we have been in a catch-up mode and we've greatly improved the paving index. But we are actually going to take a dip in the next calendar year before resuming a reinvestment in paving. That is the end of the presentation. I would be happy to answer any of the Commission's questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Leach. I just want to quickly remind the commissioners, because I know some folks came in right as we were just getting started there. If you'd like to be recognized because you have a question or a comment, raise your hand if you have the raise hand button. If you happen to not have the raise hand button, just put something into the conversation there, into the chat that you want to be recognized, and I will recognize you that way instead. So I think I saw Commissioner Buck up here first. Go ahead, Commissioner Buck.
Hi, sorry, I'm dealing with IT issues as many of us are, I'm sure. So first question about repaving. It shows what looks like a pretty high PCI, 75, 76. Is that median PCI or the absolute sort of minimum of any street on the system?
It's an average across the whole system of both arterials and residential streets. And it is done through a rolling survey where a portion of the street network is surveyed every year for paving condition. Generally, keeping paving index around 75% keeps it in a state of good repair. When you allow your paving system to drop significantly below that, you begin to push your paving program into not just resealing for arterials, but milling and repaving. And if you let your paving system deteriorate enough, you're into reconstruction. So a one-year cut seems manageable, but a multi-year cut actually does create liabilities in the longer term.
Okay. Follow-up question. I'm a little bit concerned about cutting the repaving simply because we're well into over a year since the passage of the bike element of master transportation plan. We sort of have 4 elements that we can use to implement new bike facilities. We've got new development, and it's been a struggle to to get developers to recognize their obligations under the new bike element. We have capital projects, which are obviously expensive and time consuming, and we're continuing work on those, but there's certainly none delivering any time in the next year or two. We have quick hit projects where people proactively go out and identify restriping opportunities and implement them independent of repaving, and we don't seem to do much of that anymore. And then we have repaving, which provides probably as far as I know, the only 3 bike lanes that are going in this year in Arlington, and now we're cutting that part of our 4-legged stool of bicycle facilities. What is the plan for the coming fiscal year to keep up implementation of on-street bicycle facilities to implement the Bike Master Plan?
Well, Mr. Buck, as you did mention that we do have 3 arterial segments that are slated for repaving this summer, early fall, which will be upgrading the bike and pedestrian facilities in those corridors. Those are, for the other members of the commission, Clarendon Boulevard in the Roslyn area. We have Potomac Avenue from the Alexandria City line up to the intersection with Crystal Drive, which is a pretty long stretch. And then we have Wilson Boulevard extending from Ashland School all the way to the Fairfax County line and Patrick Henry Drive. And those will all be done this year. I would say when we're looking at a reduced paving budget, wear and tear on paving is more pronounced on the arterial network. And those are the opportunities for upgrading pedestrian and bicycle facilities. So we will work with Water Sewer Streets to look at that prioritization. But generally, the paving wears out much more quickly on the arterials. So I believe that there will still be opportunities for additional enhancements. I would also say we have the Vision Zero Action Plan development happening this year, which is looking in great detail at crashes and crash patterns. And I think it too will be identifying places where we actually need to reposition street assets, upgrade markings, et cetera.
Commissioner Clement.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I actually sort of want to, this is a point of information more than a question, and that is that 2 nights ago there was a CIP hearing, and there was modest public comment, and much of it was negative, and it involved transportation. People are concerned about the cuts in the paving budget, not just because they, are aficionados of striped streets or whatever, but because they saw an inequity in that. I don't know if the Transportation Commission is aware, but there's going to be a $51 million bond issue for stormwater functions or facilities. And although there is definitely a need for that, the fact that this stormwater bond is the lion's share of the funding that's going to be going for referendum this year represents a certain inequity. And in addition to that, there are some environmentalists in the county who are very concerned about how some of that stormwater money is going to be allocated. For example, about $2.6 million is going to be allocated to a questionable stream bank restoration project in Donaldson's Run. So basically, it looks as though the stormwater budget has beggared the transportation budget. And I think that this is contrary to one of the stated priorities that you just announced tonight, which is street safety as part of safety enhancement. And certainly maintaining our streets, particularly our arterials, in a good state of repair is a priority safety issue. So for all those reasons, I am very concerned about this particular CIP, but would be happy to hear what the Director of Transportation has to say about it further. Over.
Well, I will just mention that The stormwater proposal is actually, it's a bond proposal from the stormwater fee or tax. It is not actually a general obligation bond. So it is a specific revenue stream for stormwater programs. And I think what I would recommend for the commission in terms of weighing into the board, judge it for what it is for that program. I can really only speak tonight for transportation. And I can tell you that that there really are pressures on the general obligation bond. And paving is completely funded from AGO dollars, which are general fund, and then GEO bond. The reason our transportation program overall has about $150+ million is that we bring in a lot of outside sources, a lot of grant funds, and we also have some dedicated revenues like the commercial and industrial real estate tax and the tax equivalent financing district in Pentagon City, Crystal City, Potomac Yard. So there really is no competition between the transportation program that is before you and what the manager proposed for stormwater. So I think you have to really assess it on its own merits.
Commissioner Raddick?
Thank you. I was wondering if you could speak more, Mr. Leach, to the West Glebe and Mount Vernon, Arlington Ridge Bridge, those two bridges.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we have 3 bridges in the county that had a certain type of construction that was considered innovative post-World War II. These are post-tension structures. The first one we had to replace was the bridge at George Mason and Carlin Springs. These bridges are deteriorating pretty rapidly. So we did get that one replaced. The one that is in most is in need of replacement is West Glebe, which connects Arlington with Alexandria. And there is a proposed cost-sharing arrangement between Arlington and the city to rebuild that bridge. And that was the subject of a community process. It would include expanded bike ped facilities, but that bridge right now is weight restricted because trucks over a certain weight really cannot safely be accommodated. And the bridge at Ridge Road, Mount Vernon, is the same structural type, post-tension, also deteriorating, and will need to be replaced probably in a slightly longer time frame, probably in the 3 to 5 year time frame. So these are liabilities, and they're liabilities that we share with the city of Alexandria.
Related to follow up to the Ridge Road and Mount Vernon, that bridge in particular, I think are the both sidewalks currently out of commission on this bridge?
I have to check on that. I believe one sidewalk was out of commission, but not both.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'll just wrap up and say the funding that's in the CIP is principally for advancing the West Glebe replacement.
Thank you. Commissioner Lantelmi, I think you're up next.
Yes, thank you. You'd mentioned that the Shirlington Bridge is also part of the, some funds will be spent on that. Does that include the proposed parallel pedestrian bridge, or is it just for the Shirlington Bridge itself? Shirlington Road Bridge.
What you're looking at is FY21 funding. So we have the Shirlington Road Bridge has 2 components. One component is a bridge maintenance component, which is the bridge needs some work. It is not the same structure as the other 2 that I've talked about. The bridge is structurally sound, but it needs some maintenance, and we will be upgrading the intersections, expanding the sidewalks to make it safer. In addition, we are also advancing a parallel bike ped facility, and that work is well underway.
Okay, so I just wanted to confirm that that is moving ahead on schedule, both portions of the Shirlington Road Bridge project.
Yeah, I believe the maintenance portion will probably go into construction in the spring. And I believe I don't have the exact timeline for the Bike Ped Bridge, but it is funded. We have county funds and a revenue sharing grant from the state for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Leach, can you confirm whether the Army Navy Drive Complete Streets project is included in this year's CIP?
It is considered a fully funded project, and work right now is at 90% design, and we are pushing forward to keep it on schedule and put it out to bid.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Brose, I think you're up next.
Thanks. I think you may have said it, Dennis, but does the $30 million for the Metro, is that our commitment, just making good on our commitment for this year?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
All right, back to Commissioner Clement. Thank you for waiting.
Yes, this is just to pursue one more question on the same issue. So, for example, if for some reason the county manager decided to withdraw his money for the Donaldson Run project, the $2.5 million, that money could not go to transportation. That is
correct.
Okay, and then one other thing, is not the county's debt ratio based? Is it based exclusively on the general fund, or is any part of the stormwater operations included in the computation of the county's debt ratio? Do you know what that is?
I think that is more a question more appropriate for our Department of Management and Finance staff. I would say it's probably not directly impacting the debt ratios, but again, I would be much more comfortable deferring that response to our capable staff at DMF.
Well, I just want to satisfy my conscience that if I vote for this budget, I will do so with the knowledge that no money could have been pulled out of the stormwater budget to improve our paving operations.
That's absolutely true.
All right.
All right, Commissioner Price.
Mr. Leach, thank you for your presentation. I thought I heard in the CIP that the work at Lee and Glebe is part of that. That is correct?
That is correct.
And can you go into more detail about that? I know I live in the area. I know for that, I guess the undergrounding of utilities is part of that project, but can you tell us a little bit more about what's involved in that project?
Sure. It's a two-phase project. The first phase, which was very lengthy and disruptive, was basically putting all of the utility duct banks underground and ultimately rerouting the utilities. The second part, which is actually in construction now, is rebuilding all of the street infrastructure. And it's more than just an intersection. It extends for almost a block in every direction. It also includes at least 5 and maybe 6 upgraded bus stops. So it's new curb and gutter, new sidewalk, streetscape, lighting. There's a substantial amount of bus stop work that's included, that's funded out of the transit program, and then a rebuilt signal, upgraded lighting.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wadsworth.
Has WMATA communicated anything about their ability to meet their capital commitments and matching funds for the projects where we're jointly funding things, like the elevator project in this case?
I would say that WMATA has been very cooperative in advancing our projects, and we have 3 active projects with them. But all of those projects are funded by us, not by them.
Thank you.
All right, back to Commissioner Buck.
So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. I switched computers because I didn't want to use my work computer, and now I'm on anyway, it's just a mess. I don't have the raise hand button anymore. I'm sorry. So multi-part question. There are two intersection projects that I'm frankly not familiar with that the budget memo said were being basically suspended. And then there was a trail extension, the Arlington Boulevard Trail extension from Courthouse to Roslyn, that had some confusing verbiage in the budget memo as to what exactly was happening and why that project was being suspended. It said that because of an anticipated loss of a federal grant meant that the project was suspended. And I wasn't sure of the causal flow. Was it because we were suspending local dollars, we were losing a federal grant, or because we lost a federal grant, we were suspending the project? A lot of questions in there, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so essentially when we looked at the program, again, one of our criteria was to really continue to move things that already were underway. That means design contracts have been let, there's been a substantial amount of staff work and community engagement. We've let construction contracts. And so it was really important to continue to move the program forward. There were some projects in our portfolio that were lagging, that simply were not in a position for substantial work to be undertaken in FY21. And those are the projects that were listed that would not be funded in this CIP, but I think there's absolutely an opportunity to revisit that when we come back, probably in the spring of 2021, to look at a 3 to 6 year CIP. So the things that were not advanced in this 1 year are projects where no work had been started.
Okay, I guess I'm particularly then just interested in that trail project, which had a sort of a different explanation, and it had to do with grants and just something about a federal grant. And I'm just curious, is it a matter of the project is suspended because a grant was lost and we don't have, in this constrained environment, we don't have the local capital to take it up, or?
I'm going to have to actually defer on this and try to get back to you. I don't have that level of information in front of me, even with good technology. But we've definitely taken notes down, and we will get a response out.
It helps if I unmute myself. Does anybody else have questions for Mr. Leach? All right. Does anybody have a conversation about this item or a motion?
I had one more question, if it's okay.
I think you're up.
I'm told that there was a previous capital item for a sidewalk inventory and prioritization study. One, I'm going under the assumption that such studies are a capital expenditure, and two, is that buried somewhere within this budget, or is there still no inventory of where our sidewalk gaps are?
From what I can tell you, it is not in the transportation CIP that is in front of the commission this evening. There was a staff recommendation to fund such a study, and there is right now no funding in the current proposal for that in FY21.
So, do you need a move to approve?
We could use a motion of some sort if somebody's got something in their head.
Here we go. Move to recommend the fiscal year 21 capital improvement plan.
Second.
All right, we have a motion to recommend that the county board approve the one-year capital improvement plan as presented before us. Is there any discussion of this motion or amendments?
I guess I would, in terms of discussion, I would say that a lot of the cuts and a lot of the omissions seem to be, oh, I'm sorry, I'm ahead of others who are raising their hands in the chat box.
No, I think those are old hand raises from 10 minutes ago.
Okay, you're right. Yeah, I think I'm concerned that many of these cuts seem to be around the priorities that I have, which are street safety, active transportation, and are comparatively minor investments. And there just doesn't seem to be, there seems to be a whole lot of downside potential and not a whole lot of upside potential in this particular budget to follow through on things like the bike element of the master transportation plan, which still doesn't have any kind of implementation plan that I've seen or any progress on creating one. Vision Zero, I'm frankly not privy to what progress is being made or what might be in that plan, much less what might get funded out of that. The suspension of a trails project concerns me, and I don't know enough about the two intersection projects that are proposed to be suspended to really know what we're losing there. So I'm frankly loath to endorse the budget, and that's before we even consider the sort of externalities of the stormwater budget.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this motion?
The only thing I'd like to add to that is going off what Commissioner Buck said is the reality based on is that we don't have any plans or anything, any shovel ready, for lack of a better term, for the bike element to get any project done. And since there's none of those projects in the pipeline, there's, based on what Mr. Leach was saying, there's nothing to continue to keep moving forward. So that's just, I think, is a symptom of our poor bike element implementation. But I don't know if, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's certainly an unfortunate. Go ahead, Mr. Leach.
If I could respond, I think what you would find as you dig deeper into the fairly large portfolio of projects that are moving forward, whether it be in Pentagon City, Crystal City, Potomac Yard, Army Navy Drive, Boundary Channel, east end of Columbia Pike, west end of Columbia Pike, what you will find is that a significant amount of the investment is actually in bike ped facilities. These are principally not road projects. They are multimodal projects that are intended to improve safety and accessibility and create really important linkages between our sidewalks and trails. So there is a tremendous amount in the existing pipeline.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Yeah, there are certainly some good projects continuing to move forward, like Army Navy. It is certainly unfortunate timing that this first CIP that has rolled around since we passed the bike plan is such a constrained CIP. Commissioner Rich, go ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Leach. Thank you for that presentation. I just want to express a little bit of frustration that I feel that the Lee-Glebe intersection work is not particularly well coordinated with the Plan Lee Highway effort. At least in my presence in the community forum, I haven't seen any connection to that discussion. And I just hope that we don't end up sinking a lot of resources into changes there that the community only decides that we want to change again after that process goes forward. But I also understand that it's difficult to do anything about that now. Thank you.
Commissioner Brose.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in sort of support of passing the motion, this is obviously a very unusual time for us. And given that we're doing this in a time where revenues are down, expected to be down, a one-year plan makes sense right now. And I think we can come back next year and have a lot more conversation about the things that are near and dear to our hearts in terms of what we want to get done with all the bike element and other things I think that are really important to us. But I think at this point, we're just trying to get through the year ahead. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Burrows. Commissioner Clement. Commissioner Clement, I believe you raised your hand, but you're currently muted. Commissioner Clement, we can't hear you.
All right, there. Do you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Something happened with my connection. Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Burrows. We're in a very, we are really, truly in an amazing crisis. I believe that Director Leach has done everything he possibly could do to further our interests. And he hasn't been specific about it, but I suspect that he's tried very hard and just is unable to deliver on account of the crisis. Over.
Anything else on this motion, anyone? I'm not seeing any other hands up or in the chat. All right, I'm going to attempt to go through one by one and ask each person how they're voting. So if you can be prepared, either already unmuted or to ninja quickly unmute yourself to vote, that would be great. And almost certainly I will accidentally forget someone partway down through, and I ask for your patience in that regard also. All right, Commissioner Clement, how do you vote on the motion?
Aye.
All right, Commissioner Yeri.
No.
Commissioner Buck.
No.
Commissioner Raddick.
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Aye.
Commissioner Burrows.
Aye.
Commissioner Wadsworth.
Aye.
I will vote aye as well. Did I miss any commissioners going down through my list? Commissioner Rich, my apologies. Go ahead.
No.
That's a no. Did I miss anybody else?
Me.
Commissioner Price. There are too many people on this meeting. You said aye, Commissioner Price?
Correct.
All right. So the motion passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to 3. Would any of those who voted no like to speak any more on their reasons for voting no so it can be noted in the letter? Commissioner Yeri?
I would emphasize my no vote is because of the fact that this is a one-year CIP and it does not seem to reflect what the highest priority in Arlington County should be, which is guaranteeing that people have a safe way to get from point A to point B without using either a car, bus, or metro. And the CIP totally misses the mark on that.
Anyone else? Sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Brook.
I would say that just going back to my original line of questioning, I don't believe that we've gotten sufficient assurances that either the Vision Zero plan is going to be followed through with adequate implementation, and that skepticism is informed by the lack of a plan to implement the bike element heretofore. I feel like there are many opportunities to implement bike facilities, going back to that 4 methods of implementation. And right now, we're doing some great capital projects, and the capital pipeline looks fantastic. But getting a project a year and taking 10 years to deliver a project means the rate of change is insufficient.
All righty. Commissioner Rich, you want to add anything with your no vote, or?
Sure. I'll mostly echo what Commissioners Yeri and Buck said, and just add that we've seen so many cities around the world implementing very quick build predicted bike lanes in response to the pandemic. And I sincerely believe that Arlington should do the same. And I do think that the capital improvement plan would be an effective way of funding that.
All right. Thank you very much. Anything else for the good of the order on this item, folks? Oh, wait, there's somebody in chat that I missed. No. Oh, no. Now I've done something terrible. And I've shrunk my actual meeting window in a way that is very off-putting.
Chairman Slat, should I call the next item?
Yes, go ahead and call the next item, and I'll figure out what terrible thing I've just done to my teams.
Our next item is item number 3. This is the Shirlington General Land Use Plan Study and Concept Plan. This is an action item. I'll turn this over to Margaret Tulloch-Reeves from CPHD to give the staff overview. Margaret, welcome.
Thank you. And let me see if I can share my screen here. Let's see. There we go. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. So just to give you a little bit of an overview, Frit and Weta are the two applicants who requested a general land use plan amendment from low office apartment hotel to medium office apartment hotel for the areas that you can see here outlined. And they also requested an associated rezoning from CO 1.5 to CO 2.5. And the reason that we embarked on the special glove study that we've just completed is that this is an area of the county that does not have an adopted plan. Yes, there is a phased development site plan for the village at Shirlington, which you can see here. The outlines of that are in the blue, but it is an area without an adopted plan. So therefore, we needed to take a look at this request, and that was the genesis for our special general land use plan study. Here you can see an excerpt from the general land use plan, and you can see Shirlington here is in the light blue, and that is the low office apartment hotel. And there's a tiny smidgen of low medium office apartment hotel, but the majority of the area is that low office apartment hotel. In terms of the zoning, the entire area, which you can see here in the yellow, is CO 1.5. And so that has a maximum height of 8 to 12 stories for office and 10 to 12 for residential or hotel. The density is 72 units per acre for multifamily, 110 for hotel, and then it's that 1.5 FAR for office. Here is just a little look at the area and its surrounding the surrounding context. Here you can see the village at Shirlington in the blue. Over here we have Arlington Mill Drive, Shirlington Park, 4 Mile Run, Jenny Dean Park. Over here we have the Arlington County Trade Center. Here we have I-395, and then up this way Park, Shirlington, and Fairlington. One of the things we looked at when we began our study is we did an analysis of the existing level of service. And you can see that at the key intersections in around the village at Shirlington, there is an adequate level of service currently. This area, even though it is the only urban village in the county that is not located on Metro, it is actually a very rich, the area is very rich from a transit perspective. So you can see here there's a lot of bus service in this area, and there are also a lot of trails in this area, bike and pedestrian trails in this area. You're right on I-395. There's the pedestrian bridge over 395. So there's a lot of connectivity in this area, even though it's not on Metro. And here you can see this is Arlington County's only public bus station. There are more than 2,000 commuters that use this station each day. And it's even anticipated to expand slightly to accommodate additional Alexandria bus rapid transit in the future. Parking is something that comes up a lot when people talk about Shirlington. Right now, there is a very large surface parking lot here. That is one of the areas that the applicants are interested in potentially redeveloping. And there are a number of large above-grade parking garages in this area. There's a very high water table given the location adjacent to 4 Mile Run. And so there are a lot of above-grade parking lots in this area. So here we have a quick overview of the low office apartment hotel, medium office apartment hotel, and the corresponding zoning districts. So what they're requesting is this medium office apartment hotel, and which corresponds to a CO 2.5. So you can see here the differential in density going from 1.5 to a 2.5 FAR. And then over here you can see the heights. The 8 to 10 goes up to 12 to 16. So this is what we analyzed. And some of the things that we looked at is that, you know, Shirlington is very different. The village at Shirlington is very different from the other areas that we've looked at for our special GLUP studies, and particularly special GLUP study plus projects. This area already has substantial existing assets and a very well-defined urban village character. So these are some of the things that we looked at as we started examining the area and talking with the community and stakeholders about what's important in this area and what should we look at as we start to develop our heights plan, our density plan, and our recommendations. Some of the things that we heard a lot from the community was this idea of retaining a mix of uses. There's a very vibrant mix of uses here. Focusing those lower heights along the core and higher heights along the periphery, respecting existing residential development in terms of height and step backs, enhancing pedestrian connections and open space, assuming some level of preservation of the legacy buildings, preserving and conserving mature trees to the extent possible, and assuming one level of underground parking given the water table issue that I mentioned previously. Here's a 3D model that gives you kind of an overview here. This is the existing conditions, and here you can see this is really the core of Shirlington. Campbell Avenue is kind of the main street, and then you can see some of the buildings on the periphery, and this is looking north. This direction would be north. Here are the existing heights. Again, you can see they're low heights here on Campbell Avenue, the main street, and then they go up to higher heights, with the highest being here, the IO Piazza at 13, and the condominium building here at 11 to 12. There's also a large residential complex here that ranges from about 4 to 6 stories. This is the Shirlington bus transit station for your reference. And so when we looked at this, we really focused in on this commercial core, kind of excluding the peripheral residential areas and really focusing on this commercial core. So we did a number of modeling scenarios to solicit feedback. And one of the models that we did was this one. So just to let you know, this is not a recommended scenario here. This is just a hypothetical scenario that we put together. This shows the maximum possible density if this area was completely scraped and rebuilt at CO 2.5 using the maximum heights permitted of that 16 and 12, and showing, you know, with LEED bonus and with affordable housing bonus. So this is if everything was maxed to the max. And the reason we did this is we wanted to look at what it would do in terms of impacts. So we looked again at these existing levels of service. You can see here, these are the key intersections we looked at. And they were all functioning well, except perhaps, you know, to a tiny degree, this one here. But this could potentially be addressed in the future through the 395 Circle potential project. And this is looking at what would happen to those intersections at that maximum hypothetical level of density that we're not even recommending for this site. And you can see the intersections still function adequately in this area. So that told us that additional density could be accommodated in this area. The other analysis that we did related to transportation was this parking study. And it also showed that there is, that additional density can be accommodated in this area. There is adequate parking right now. And one of the things we kept hearing and was confirmed by our utilization study is that the parking could even be more efficiently used with better wayfinding, signage, and parking management. This process involved a lot of community engagement. We had a total of 6 LRPC meetings, and at those meetings we had representatives from the 3 civic associations nearby, Shirlington, Green Valley, and Fairlington. Of course, the project area is located within Shirlington, but Green Valley and Fairlington abut the study area, or quite close to the study area. We had a representative from the Transportation Commission, Park and Rec Commission, HLRB, Public Arts, and a representative from FRIT and WIDA. We had a walking tour in 2019, a community forum, and a companion online survey with approximately 300 respondents. We did an online survey on the visions and principles, and we received a strong letter of support from FRIT, WIDA, Shirlington, and Signature. And right now we have an online survey on the draft document that's currently open. And so if any of you are interested in submitting your comments, please feel free to do so. So taking into consideration all of the input that we heard and all of staff's analyses, we developed this heights map. So here you can see where we have some lower heights here, some preservation of historic frontages along that key portion of Campbell Avenue, and then some higher heights on the periphery, on the 395 periphery, and then some higher heights with a dip and a scoop here on the Arlington Mill Drive edge, and then some infill development possibilities here on this edge on Quincy, or sorry, on Randolph. And here you can see a model of our proposed redevelopment scenario. Again, this is looking kind of northwest. And so in addition to our heights plan, we also have a number of guiding principles. These are the ones that we really focused in on with regards to circulation, access, and connectivity, really emphasizing the importance of maintaining this multimodal node that we have here, adding to and enhancing our pedestrian connections, wayfinding and high quality signage, and ideally a parking management plan, retaining those service alleys to make sure that loading and drop off can occur on those alleys instead of on the main streets. Here we have a map just showing some of the important connection areas, that pedestrian bridge over 395. You can see there are some existing pedestrian connections here in pink. There are some important nodes, gathering nodes here in front of the plaza, the library plaza, and here in the center of Campbell Avenue, all around that fountain. And then some other things we want to ensure to make sure that people can continue to circulate easily through this area, making sure that there's some kind of pedestrian connection here. It could be covered over by buildings, but some service or pedestrian connection there. Again, retaining one here so that this whole block doesn't become, solid development. We want to make sure that there's some access and permeability through this block. And here a connection. Again, this shows you how that, particularly this one block is so big. So we wanted to make sure that there's a drive aisle and, kind of a shared street area. It's pedestrian friendly in this area moving forward. So here's just a quick rundown of some of our recommendations. We talked about a few of these, breaking up the block, pedestrian access improvements between the trade center and the village, enhancing our streetscapes with crossings and wider sidewalks, more street trees, curb extensions, addressing those overly wide intersections, ensuring there's better wayfinding and signage. That's something we heard time and again from the community, a need for that, and additionally a need for parking enhancements. And making sure that if there are above grade garages, existing ones or future ones, that they're very well screened. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I believe the applicant would like to also address the commission.
Yes, that's correct. Hi, this is Jay Brenson with Federal Realty. How's everyone tonight?
Doing well, Jay. Welcome.
Thank you. Margaret, thank you for a great, thorough presentation. Thank you to the commission for hearing us. I know it's been a crazy few months, and we were very appreciative to get ourselves on the docket for what's been a really great process with staff and working with the community for the past couple of years. Just for anyone who doesn't know, Federal Realty Investment Trust, we're a real estate investment trust. We've been in business for over 50 years. We've owned the village at Shirlington, the retail components of the village at Shirlington for since 1996. The last major investment that we made in Shirlington was the extension of Campbell Avenue to the west of Randolph. That brought, and that was done really hand in hand with the county, bringing great assets like Signature Theater and the library to the village. So we are a long-term holder operator. We are very much in the business of creating great places for people to shop, gather, and create community. That's what we are about, and that was the onus behind our request for the zoning consideration, and the increase in zoning FAR from the CO 1.5 to CO 2.5. We applied in December of 2017. We've spent a long time working closely with the Civic Association and key neighbors such as WETA and Signature Theater to ensure that we have support and that we're thinking about this the right way. But our big concern for Shirlington is that we haven't had a big investment in Shirlington since our last work at 2001 to 2002, like I said. And Shirlington, with all the new development that's coming to Arlington County, has been coming to Arlington County, I should say, for the past 15 years and is projected to come, particularly with big projects like what's going on in Pentagon City and Crystal City. We're very concerned that we're very concerned for the long-term vitality and economic relevance of the village. We certainly love its charm. It's one of the country's first true mixed-use live, work, play environments. We think we certainly love the place, but we see that there are opportunities for additional investment here, and we think we've got support to do that. So with that said, I'm going to I think we can move past. We can go to the next slide, Ashley, if you don't mind. Ashley, can you go to the next slide? I don't have control of this. There we go, thanks. So, and Margaret already touched on this, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but I will just reemphasize the one key item, which is that the transportation infrastructure that's in place can handle a hypothetical level of density that is well beyond anything that's even being considered for any future redevelopment projects in Shirlington. So we just wanted to reemphasize that point, and that the guiding principles that were developed throughout the process were very cognizant of the transportation infrastructure that was in place. We'll go to the next slide, Ashley. Thank you. And then again, within the parking study, Margaret already touched on it, but again, I will just reemphasize again that Shirlington has over 3,000 parking spaces in structured garages. In the evenings, that equates to a retail parking ratio over 10 spaces per 1,000. There is also a strong number, I think, over nearly 150 or street parking spaces, which are obviously very critical now when we're trying to emphasize the importance of pickup and drop off to help the retail tenants that we have there. Let me just think. The biggest issue with parking is that there's multiple agreements that are happening across multiple owners, and it's very difficult sometimes for patrons coming to the village to understand what's available for parking and when. So it really becomes a wayfinding and signage issue. more so than it is an actual quantity of spaces that exist. And of course, any additional new development that would go up in Shirlington would have to be self-parked and would have to meet any parking standards for its proposed use. We can go to the next slide, and I think Tad is going to go ahead and take the last couple of slides. He's Tad Lunger, our land use attorney.
Hi, good evening, Chairman and members of the Transportation Commission. Can everybody hear me?
Sure thing.
Okay. So Tad Lunger here as land use attorney for Federal Realty. I love this slide. I'm glad Margaret put it in her presentation. It's been sort of the brainchild of the land use proposal, which obviously dovetails into the transportation study. This is a big part of what has spurred sort of these notions of revitalization and reinvestment in Shirlington. And, you know, it's been the effort that Arlington has put forward, you know, into kind of modernizing and the planning here over so many years. We feel like Shirlington's now just one component to many different areas that can be connected and intertwined more effectively. From Fairlington up and the communities up the hill to the Shirlington PDSP to the newly planned 4 Mile Run Valley Plan, which will actually connect Shirlington all the way west to Columbia Pike, and with Green Valley's revitalization plan in place, and even the city of Alexandria, as Margaret mentioned, with transit and with the pedestrian path across 395. When Shirlington was originally planned, it was turned in toward itself in kind of an insular manner, focusing planning and connectivity along Campbell Avenue with its back facing along Arlington Mill Drive. Today, we have an incredible amount of public green space planned that will be central to these 3 planning areas, giving us the opportunity to build on the connectivity envisioned with these other planning areas and provide the interconnectivity between Shirlington, Jenny Dean Park, and Green Valley. We've approached this study request with the concept to kind of open the front door at Shirlington and to actively engage in the planning areas adjoining it and encourage people to move between these planning areas in the best possible manner and locations while preserving the character of what we all enjoy and experience now in Shirlington with walkable retail, community, and public spaces and spaces for the arts. Next slide, Ashley. What's really neat, at least to me, about Shirlington is its success story. Jay kind of touched on it. It's kind of a unique case study in Arlington on how smart development can create successful places not immediately adjacent to metro locations. It is a destination as well as a great place to live and work. It's become a destination. To and from Shirlington, someone can get pretty much anywhere they want to go using a variety of transit resources, all listed on this slide. You all know this better than I do. You know, a multimodal system feels like it has just kind of evolved here over the years, but in reality, Arlington has planned it step by step and, you know, effort by effort. Someone can pretty much get anywhere they need to go or come to Shirlington via any multimodal venue they choose. There are things we think that can be improved on, like increased direct connections between the transit station and the Pentagon Metro Station for people who work and for companies that employ people in Shirlington. And we do believe an improved wayfinding system for parking resources would be fantastic. There are so many great parking resources in Shirlington. But otherwise, there's no question there's a robust amount of transportation options in Shirlington. All those details are in the study that was commissioned and staff evaluated. And I think we could say we look forward to the revitalization of Shirlington and becoming more connected to the vision this broader planning area in Arlington has sort of become. And so unless Jay has something else, I think that concludes our presentation.
No, thanks, Ted. That was it. We're obviously open to any questions if that's appropriate, but thank you all very much for your consideration.
Great, thank you very much. We'll move on to commission questions and comment. So if commissioners want to let me know in the chat if they're raising their hand or raise their hand with questions, that would be great. Commissioner Clement's got her hand up first, so go ahead, Commissioner Clement.
Okay, well, I have some real serious issues with this plan. First of all, we're going to be essentially doubling the density of a neighborhood that's already dense. Secondly, there was no transportation impact analysis presented. This is the Transportation Commission. This is not the Planning Commission. We're entitled to have a little more information about the transportation impacts of this development, and we didn't get it. All we were told is that all 6 intersections in the immediate vicinity are fine, except for one, which is LOSE right now. That's the intersection at Arlington Mill Drive and Shirlington Road. And it might get worse, but that's okay because LOSF is fine if it goes to that. But I think my biggest concern is not technically or at least not immediately, a transportation issue concern, and that is the lack of any analysis of the impact on schools. There is no mention, there is only a couple of mentions of the word school in the entire 150-page document that we received, and that was a historical reference. So I'm really concerned that the only impact that was even discussed was the transportation impact, and we didn't even get a transportation impact analysis. Now, we are told that the Shirlington Civic Association is enthusiastic about this plan, but we didn't get any letters to that effect. I mean, we don't have any substantive proof that this has solid community backing. We know that the Fairlington Civic Association just published a statement in its newsletter saying that it had severe concerns about the project, and I have no information whatsoever about what Green Valley Civic Association has to say about it. So if anybody knows the answers to those questions, I'd like to hear about it. But right now, this is looking like another project where I'm going to have to abstain because I don't have enough information in front of me to make an informed decision. Over.
Does staff have any response to the Commissioner Clement's comments?
Yes, I'd like to say that just going back a little bit. So there is no project that is being evaluated. There's no specific project. This is a general land use plan study. It's a high-level study looking at land use over a broad 27-acre area. So there is no specific project that has been submitted. This is just land use plan. So I think, we need to really have that distinction that this is a land use planning study. There is no project that's been submitted, no PDSP amendments that's been submitted, no site plan application has been submitted. So there is no TIA because there is no project. What we did was we did this analysis that looked at the potential impacts of much greater density even than we are considering in the plan. We are not considering heights of 16 stories. We are not considering density levels that correspond to that. So I think that's something that I just wanted to clarify. You are also mentioning...
Margaret, if I could jump in a little bit.
Please.
And as far as realizing it is a land use study, and there really was an adequate level of transportation analysis for a general, land use study. So, we took the kind of the barometer of how it's operating today, and then we took sort of the maximum of what could happen out there. And, we saw the impact was minimal. And, with that, realizing the other side of the transportation end of this is really parking. And obviously, staff did a parking sort of analysis and looked at the options there. And I guess when this was redeveloped 20 years ago, this was an early kind of first attempt at shared parking, where we had these parking structures and certain floors were allocated to certain uses and certain properties. So this was, you know, a very early attempt at shared parking, and certain elements of that has worked fairly well, and certain elements I think we've learned from. So it's not that for what we have there, it's not that we need additional parking. It's really, you know, we've identified that, you know, we need sort of parking management, wayfinding, and obviously any new development project will have to be parked. So I just wanted to sort of emphasize some of the transportation impact. You know, it has been sort of, you know, it was looked at a high level, so it was included in this.
Richard, I got a couple points to add too. This is Sergio Viricochea with TE&O, Transportation Engineering and Operations. And I wanted to just point out that although this was a GLUP study, there were aspects of it that we did treat it as a TIA or MMTA. We did scope it out and with the consultant, ensure that they had recent traffic count data, review their model as well, ensure they followed industry standards such as ITE, trip generation, and also fed them the mode share for Shirlington area for productions and attractions, so that they know that when we add the new development, how much to remove auto-wise. But I just wanted to say that some aspects were like a TIA, although this was mostly a GLUB study.
Yeah, and I'd like to just add one more thing, if I might. If you're interested in reading the full report, it is in the appendix of our plan, which is posted online. And I think you were all given a copy of that. And if you can't find it, just Google Shirlington Special GLUP Study and go online and you can see our plan, and it's in the appendix there.
What is in the appendix? You're saying the transportation impact analysis is in the appendix?
Richard, what would be the best word to characterize that?
I think there is a summary in the appendix.
Yeah, you could.
Can you give me like a specific page or section?
Well, I certainly after, I can't get you that right
All
now.
right. Okay.
But
All right. Sorry.
we can
All right.
supply that.
All right.
It's in like the 100 page 150, 158, somewhere in there of the PDF
document.
But yeah, there's individual parcel level trip generation calculations and all of that if you want, Commissioner Clement. I believe Commissioner Price was the next with his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I want to thank you for the presentation, Margaret. I appreciate it, and thank you for the applicant for their presentation. And I applaud first before I even criticize. I always like to come out with I thank you for the vision, especially on the local connectivity issue. My family and I we travel around Arlington on bikes pretty regularly, and I like the idea of a better local connectivity, especially to the 4 Mile Run Trail. Last time we did that, we love Shirlington, so it's a great respite space when we're going around Arlington. We're frequent travelers to there, but we feel like I take my own life into my own hands every time I try to go from 4 Mile Run into the downtown, onto Campbell Avenue. So hopefully something can be done to improve that connectivity for both pedestrians as well as for bicyclists. I think that's vital. But that being said, I looked through the study. I didn't see in it, but is there anything in it, or is there a vision to reduce the amount of circulation of cars, especially on Campbell Avenue? Because I think Campbell Avenue is fantastic. If it were up to me, I'd like to see that more as a pedestrian plaza, because I think with the small sidewalks, I guess if there's expanding of sidewalks, I think is a perfect location to exclude cars. And I didn't know if that's part of the vision in this, or it has ever been questioned or considered. I'd like someone to talk about that.
So that was one of the things that had come up during the process. It was something that we talked about. However, given the number of small retailers along Campbell Avenue, there was real concern about not having cars for short-term parking, availability for short-term parking, pick up and drop off in front of those businesses from an economic standpoint. However, that street is something that is closed. Campbell Avenue is closed often for large festivals. So that is something that can be done on a case-by-case basis. But I don't know, Richard, if you have anything else you want to add on that?
Well, it's a case where we were really looking to sort of manage the vehicles that are out there, not really to restrict. So it's a case where, we want to give people access, via vehicles, however, at a very slow, speed where it kind of accommodates, pedestrian, traffic as well. So it was looking at this, not to really, sever the connection, but to manage it.
Commissioner Buck, I believe you were next. All right, while Commissioner Book works on his tech, let's jump to Commissioner Lantelmi. I think you were next.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple of things to note. I have met with the president of the Shirlington Civic Association in anticipation of the Planning Commission meeting next week. The Shirlington Civic Association is generally supportive of this. However, they're not apparently going to, as of today, support this because they would rather see additional density on the site. They feel that the heights could be higher and support additional height for the residential buildings. And that's supported by the transportation analysis, which shows that even at the maximum density, it will not overwhelm the intersections around the area. I have also met with one of the officials at the Green Valley Civic Association. They're still considering differences in heights. Their concern is more how it faces Green Valley and how it presents to Green Valley and how open it is to Green Valley. I haven't heard anything from Arlington. Personally, I think that this site can support additional density, and given the need for affordable housing, for housing at every price point, I think we could have additional height at the periphery of this overall site. And I think that transportation supports that. I also note that I've seen a letter from the Pedestrian Advisory Committee, which is also looking for wider sidewalks through here and has raised that the western end of Campbell Avenue could be restricted to traffic to pick up and drop off in order to widen the sidewalks and make it more bicycle and pedestrian friendly there. I certainly want to add my voice to Commissioner Price's comments about it's not exactly easy right now on a bicycle to get into Shirlington from the 4 Mile Run bike trail. That is a connectivity that does need to be improved, which is why I raised the Shirlington Bridge. Shirlington Bridge project. But yeah, my feeling is sidewalks can be wider. Connectivity is great. Keeping the additional pedestrian pass-throughs through the superblocks is great. There's a number of things that are very, very good in this study, and overall I will support it, except for I feel this site does support additional density. It's a good place to put it. Thank you.
Thank you, especially for all of that context, firsthand knowledge there, Commissioner Lantelmi. I really appreciate it. All right, I believe Commissioner Buck, have you sorted out your tech issues? Are you ready to talk? Nope. All right, we will head to Commissioner Raddick then in the meantime.
This is for either Mr. Best or Ms. Rhodes. If either of you have context on this, but for the parking situation, I appreciate the context, Mr. Best, on the history and why that is the weird parking restrictions are the way they are. Do you know if those are baked into leases, or can that be easily changed? Like, let's say if they wanted to get rid of the restrictions, could that be done?
Well, the county about 7 years ago had a parking study that sort of explored doing that. And I believe of the property owners, a couple of them were in favor of this and a couple of them were not. So I believe it's something that could be accommodated if everyone sort of agrees. And I'd almost turn that over to the applicant's attorney. May have a few some legal guidance for the commission on that. But it's something the county has been, obviously, when this was redeveloped in 2000, we were very enthusiastic about shared parking. However, it took shared parking it kind of divided the garages by level. And I think we've learned a big lesson from that really not to, certain cases that work, certain cases it doesn't. That's not typically, many of the shared garages nationally, no longer do that. That was more in vogue, 15, 20, 25 years ago. So I think we've learned a lot, and that's why the county 7-8 years ago, was trying to work with some of the various landholders to, further have shared parking. And obviously, what we want to do, we want to accommodate, the residential and the office, but then at certain times, accommodate even more, restaurant and retail.
Thank you.
Yeah, does the applicant have anything to add on their experience or talks with other owners in the area about revisiting these parking arrangements to add some flexibility?
Yes, this is Jay Brinson with Federal Realty. We've had those conversations over the past 2 decades. It's unfortunately, it's a very complicated set of lease obligations and cross parking and access agreements across multiple ownership entities and across in fact down to the tenant level in office buildings surrounding the site or within Shirlington, very few of which we as the applicant have direct control over. So I think there would be some opportunity for conversations and pulling the key owners of the main buildings and folks who have access to or who have not control, but who have who are party to those agreements in each of the garages and getting them together. But that's going to require, I think, some probably some leadership at the county level to convene that meeting and to facilitate trying to figure out a way to move something forward. I think at the end of the day, if the costs can be figured out a way to distribute them equitably across all groups that benefit from it, there may be a real benefit that's for everyone there. So I think there's an opportunity, but it'll be very challenging.
All right, Commissioner Yeri, I think you're up next.
Yeah, Mr. Best, you mentioned that this study is adequate in terms of how it treats transportation. What is the definition of adequate? What is like an adequate treatment of transportation in a club study typically? Because this one seems very heavy on parking and level of service.
Well, as far as, I don't think we've done too many special GLUP Plus studies. I think this is the second one we've done in the county. And really, we're trying to accommodate sort of, intersection capacity and also parking with looking at sort of, obviously some of the transit elements as well. So because this is not tied to any specific development project, or just generally tied to land use, the term adequate, I think that's really a staff's reference where we feel that we've, done an adequate job of addressing that. Obviously, we've looked at, densities that are far higher, and we believe we can accommodate that. And also,
Okay, thank you for that answer. No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah,
no, as far as, it's a case where parking has been sort of a hot button in Shirlington for the last 20 years, or certainly last, 10, 15 years. So a lot of resources did go into parking.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that answer. I think I asked because it doesn't feel like a very holistic way to look at how Shirlington fits into the broader transportation ecosystem or context, I suppose. Again, it feels very heavy on cars. It doesn't really seem to give a good treatment to how people get to Shirlington, either on foot, on bike, bus, or otherwise. I think that's kind of my concern of how that treatment is presented here.
Well, and some of that actually was done in the mode split in which staff had given the consultant. And certainly the mode split for this area not being metro is fairly high. It's a case if this were obviously, if there was a metro station right there, it would be different. But certainly, we feel we have, some adequate mode split, driving this. And, for bus transit, there is, very attractive transit there. And there's also a lot of ped and bike connectivity. And we realize we have to expand this. Really, both ped, bike, and transit need to be expanded. However, this was sort of, looking at it at a wholesale level. Can we accommodate the new trips? And the answer to that is, we believe we can. I believe Margaret would like to.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that, while in my presentation, I emphasized the transportation impacts and the level of service at the intersections and the parking, there are also a number of recommendations of a finer grain that you can see in the plan that focus on the street frontages. Chris Kreider, who I see is on the call, did a number of very nice street cross sections, looking at how the buildings would interact with the street. And so there's a lot more in the plan that, we were given 8 minutes to do our presentation. So I think if you're interested in more of that finer grain detailed, I would suggest you look at that last chapter of the plan.
I did, but thank you.
All right, let's see. Commissioner Buck, now that you're back, have you sorted out your IT issues? Can you ask your question?
We'll see. Can you hear me?
I can.
All right. Apologize. Somebody's setting off fireworks behind me. And I apologize right around the time that Jim was giving his read back and said Shirlington Civic Association supported more density. I completely lost the track. So all of that discussion, I don't know what happened. I was going to couch this as a question, but I'm just going to offer a comment because I will get dropped any minute, I'm sure. I think similar to Commissioner Yeri, I'm really concerned. We're calling this a transportation analysis. Really, the analysis was two factors. It was traffic and it was parking and trip generation. That's not all of transportation. We deal with a lot of transportation. There was really nothing about bus routing and stop volumes. There was nothing about, again, the bike element of the master transportation plan wasn't referenced. There was no safety crash data. I once saw a dog get hit on Arlington Mill Drive. It was traumatic. And Shirlington Civic Association has those little surrender flags, the orange flags, to cross Arlington Mill Drive. It's horrible. And that wasn't. Those ideas were brought up by commenters, and they're not addressed in the plan. The trail itself along Arlington Mill, there was no analysis of the level of service on the trail, and there's a lot of conflicting uses and conflicting movements on that trail. There's just a lot that wasn't analyzed for this GLUP study, and we keep saying a GLUP study is limited, and it analyzed what it was supposed to, which was, can the traffic support the additional density, and does parking capacity exist, and does it not blow up the road system? And I'm convinced it doesn't. But then there are all these finer grain recommendations. There are streetscapes, and there are curb bulb outs and things like that, and medians that are uninformed by all of those other things. The bike element, safety data, the possibilities of reducing runoff into a 4-mile run by narrowing Arlington Mill, or, Mr. Price brought up the Campbell Avenue closure. That's not really substantively addressed, and people want to hash that through. So I'm concerned that we put this GLUP plus study out, and it's the only neighborhood scale transportation guidance that people can point to of what the future of transportation looks like in this area. So that's my concern. I'm convinced that, the roads can function at an adequate level of service, and I'm convinced there's enough parking. I'm not convinced there's anything that went into creating cross sections or figuring out what intersections were most urgently needed to be reconfigured, or what the new front yard of Shirlington along Arlington Mill really needs to be. And I think we're doing Shirlington a disservice if we call this the closest thing we have to a transportation plan for Shirlington.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. All right, I think sorry, I've lost the thread a little bit here. Commissioner Rich, and then we'll go back to Commissioner Clement after that.
Hi, thank you to Ms. Roth and staff for a very in-depth general land use plan. I do want to echo Commissioner Buck a little bit. I think it's a little light on transportation, but thanks for your hard work in any case. And I think one thing I want to start by really commending you on here is this sort of shift in attitude from Shirlington being very introverted, looking in on Campbell Ave, to really taking into account the ways that it connects to neighboring areas of the county. I think that's a really fundamental shift, and I think it's really, really important, and I'm so glad to see it. I want to start with, I have a couple of different points. I want to start with a little technical point about how you present information. Would it be possible at all to bring up the slide in the presentation where you show bus routes? The other commissioners have made this one slide. But it's, so, yeah, I'll you. So it is just not very useful from a transportation planning perspective to see just this list of bus routes and their numbers. Maybe, I'm sure that you on staff have a comprehensive knowledge of all the different bus routes and where they all go, but I, as a citizen commissioner, don't. And it would be much more useful to have a map of accessibility, a set of isochrones showing what points in the county can be accessed by various modes. This is especially important for transit, but it's also important for driving, walking, and cycling. When done for cycling, it's especially important that you only include cycle routes that meet a high standard for cycling. I would say level of traffic stress 1, meaning that they're friendly for even children, really. Just to show us where people can and can't safely bike from or conveniently take a bus from. Thanks for that. That's just a point on process. It'll apply for anything going forward. It doesn't necessarily specific to Shirlington. Something that is specific to Shirlington. If you could go to the slide showing the level of service information under the maximum development area. You'll notice that almost all of these intersections, especially along Arlington Mill, are still bright green. Even in a scenario where the land has been developed to the maximum extent possible, which is very unlikely to happen. And what this tells me is that these intersections are too big. They are over-providing capacity for cars in order to function at a level that we don't even need. And what this ends up meaning, if roads are too wide for the number of cars going on them, that the cars are going faster than they should, which is really bad for safety. I think that I don't want to approve any major plans for Shirlington without reducing Arlington Mill to one lane in each direction for mixed traffic. I know that's a big point, but I think it should be really fundamental for the development of the area. I mentioned your shift in attitude toward sort of extroversion for Shirlington, connections to adjoining neighborhoods. I think this is really important, and I think we need to take this even farther. I think we need to be planning for redevelopment of the Arlington Trade Center area. I know it might be very difficult to imagine right now, but we need to plan for really long term, right? And we need to understand how we can use that, as well as the connections to the north and south, to bring people from, especially from Park Shirlington in the south, those apartments, toward Campbell Avenue. Finally, a question on parking. Do you have any numbers on sort of average parking utilization rates? I might have just missed this for the sort of parking in general. Thank you.
And I'll let Richard Best respond to the parking question.
As far as we do have the utilization rates, the garages were looked at sort of, midday on a work day. They were also looked in the evenings and in a weekend. So we do have that data. Regarding Arlington Mill is has a lot of truck traffic. So we have to be very careful with what we do there. Obviously, the Trade Center is served by, Arlington Mill. And also the village of Shirlington has a lot of truck traffic, a lot of deliveries. So, I would agree there's probably some long-term, opportunities of things we could do there. When we did the 4-mile run study about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we did sort of take a look at that. And there were, some possible options we did discuss. However, it was really decided in the interim because of all the truck traffic and, the pedestrian crossings, we would sort of leave it as is. But we looked at increasing parking there, which, had some positive and negative impact. We've also looked at additional trail capacity on Arlington Mill. So I think, right now in this general land use plan, we have sort of, we're kind of, this is like a big barometer of what we're testing. And certainly in the future, as things, develop or redevelop, we can look at options. But realizing this is not really a transportation study, this is a general land use plan study. So, and transportation is one important impact or one important aspect of that, but there are other things as well. So, for that, I think we really need to be careful with, how do we accommodate the truck safely on Arlington Mill?
All right. I believe we were back around to Commissioner Clement.
Well, so I'm told that there was no traffic impact analysis because this is the land use study. If we adopt this land use study, there shortly will be thereafter a site plan for approval. And the approval of the GLUP plan, and particularly its transportation aspects, will be used to justify the densification proposed in the site plan. So I think what we have here is a lot of circular reasoning. I also take Commissioner Buck's point that a transportation analysis is not exclusively parking and vehicular traffic. It does have to encompass bicycle and pedestrian traffic and the interaction of those elements with transportation and parking. And all of that is lacking here. On the one hand, I'm flattered that the developer wants the Transportation Commission's approval, but I don't think the Transportation Commission has, at this stage, sufficient information to say yay or nay. Over.
All right, Commissioner Burrows, I believe you are next.
Yeah, and maybe I was going to state it as an observation. It's a little bit of pulling together some of the comments from the last couple commissioners, which is, I think if anybody's listened to the Transportation Commission over the past year, we really are looking to not make parking the focus for every project and how much parking there is available. We are actually looking to focus on the different multimodal opportunities in terms of transit and biking and walking. And I think just to Commissioner Clement's points, we would love to be pushed out to developers before they come and think of biking and providing biking as an parking storage and stuff like that as an afterthought, but it's something that we as a community and a county put forward as some of the requirements that we're looking for. So I think absolutely the GLUP has done what it was designed to do in the current environment, but I think we're also looking 5 to 10 years down the road where hopefully we're not doing as much driving, or because, you know, for a variety of reasons, environmental and otherwise. So just a statement.
Yeah, I just want to echo a lot of what Commissioner Buck said. I was the TC rep on this special GLUP study, and I do feel like it got cut short a bit here, and I think it's really showing in the transportation section. It is very depressing to me that we have this level of detail on level of service and parking availability, but you couldn't answer, you know, how long it takes to get from Shirlington to someplace else in the county on transit, you know, on a weekday or on a weekend from this. It doesn't seem to address in any way how are we doing on at the Shirlington transit station? Like, are we running out of space? What's it going to be like when Alexandria's West End BRT comes and wants to stop at Shirlington station? Is that going to require us to cut other routes from the Shirlington transit station? Or, you know, are we going to be needing to add, you know, on-street, you know, on-street bus stops that are then going to conflict with the bike lane that's on Quincy Street? I'm really concerned about the lack of improvement to the bike lanes that exist in Shirlington. There is no mention in all of the little call outs, you know, of streetscape improvements about any attempt to turn either Randolph or Quincy into protected bike lanes. And as much as I love Chris Kreider, I don't love these streetscape cross sections. I can't even tell enough of what is in them to tell you if I like the streetscape cross section in the first place. Like, every one of them for Quincy or Randolph to me looks like we've kept like a bike lane in one direction and not in the other. Like, I can't even tell what they're trying to say or what's trying to be included. And then to top that all off, in my opinion, one of the biggest needs transportation-wise for Shirlington is how hard it is to get from up the hill in anything other than a car down to Shirlington. Like, if you're up in the area of Abingdon Elementary, if you live up there, if you're up there for some other reason and you're on foot or you're on a bike, you are taking a circuitous route back down into Shirlington, like twice as long as it ought to be, because there is no connection, because the trade center is a barrier and there are no stairs or pedestrian pass through or anything. And that's, you know, not addressed in here either. I understand that this is not a sector plan and there's only, you know, so much transportation analysis that can happen and so much planning that can happen, but I feel like we spent the entire consultant transportation budget on a level of service and parking utilization, and because of it, we don't know anything about getting to and from Shirlington via transit, getting to and from Shirlington on foot or on a bike that would have caught these things like the lack of, you know, what a barrier the trade center is, and that sort of thing. And the recommendations that are in there for streetscape wise, like, yes, we need to widen some sidewalks here and there, but a lot of it seems unsupported by any analysis. And I'm going to be honest, like, as we've gone through trying to, you know, create more protected bike lanes, like every curb bulb out that is placed into a sector plan or a special GLUP study, like, concerns me, because we've learned that those really reduce our flexibility in the street when we're talking about, can we do a quick hit protected bike lane here or some other sort of thing? You know, the bulb out becomes this concrete, you know, problem that we have to work around instead of just something that is improving pedestrian safety. So I don't feel like this GLUP study is ready for prime time from a transportation perspective. With all that said, has anybody else wanted to chime in? Have conversations sparked anything for any other commissioners, or does somebody want to move us towards a motion?
Somebody needs to make a motion, right?
Yep, at some point.
Okay, well, I would be happy to make a motion, but I haven't phrased the motion. So why don't you state the motion?
This is Darren. Let me chime in. Is this an appropriate time?
Please jump in, Darren.
I would move that we approve the Shirlington GLUP study with direction to remove any transportation conclusions and recommendations outside of those associated with level of service, trip generation, parking capacity, and internal pedestrian circulation within the development site along Arlington Mill Drive.
Is that sorry? Is that an actual motion, or is that talking about what you would like to see as a motion, Commissioner Buck? My apologies.
I am unsophisticated in the ways of wording a motion. That is the intent of what I would like to move, that we approve the Shirlington GLUP. However, I would like to see the caveat in our approval that we are removing from consideration the transportation recommendations, other than the findings that trip generation, traffic level of service, and parking are sufficient to support the density recommended.
Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second Mr. Buck's motion.
All right. Is there any conversation about that motion?
I need clarification. He's saying we support the GLUP. We do not support the transportation component, except for those pieces dealing with parking and vehicular traffic. Is that the gist of it?
That is the gist, yes. I also, we haven't discussed the pedestrian internal circulation aspects of it, or at least not during the part where I had a signal. I don't know that anybody had any concerns with those. Those seem like greenfield developments that are entirely in keeping with the intent of most of our other plans.
Well, I have a serious issue with it, because you can't approve the GLUP, really, unless you approve the transportation plan. In the two are wedded, and so I don't want to let this get away with. I do not want us to get away with it that way. In other words, it's basically ducking the issue. And we've got to hit this. In my view, we either approve it or we don't, or in my case, probably abstain. In other words, we had the motion on the floor, I think, should be, do we approve or disapprove this GLUP study? Over.
Commissioner Lantelmi, you got your hand up.
I can give a quick, for Commissioner Buck, what the Pedestrian Advisory Commission was saying. What you missed, which I did raise, is that they had some concerns about sidewalk width, and right now, because of the situation, restaurants are using it, almost all the sidewalk space, making it very difficult for pedestrians, which they used as an example to show why we really should have wider sidewalks there to allow all these uses and still allow circulation. Pedestrian Advisory also likes the additional cut-throughs that are being proposed, pedestrian cut-throughs that break up the super blocks somewhat. They also recommend that the western end of Campbell Avenue be pickup drop-off only, and allow wider sidewalks there and make it easier for bicycles and pedestrians on that end of Campbell Avenue. So just wanted you to know there was discussion about pedestrian access and pedestrian circulation within the site in the context of the special GLUP study.
Speaking to the motion, I at this time currently intend to vote against the motion because I would much prefer to recommend that the county board defer this for further work. I think the transportation I agree with Commissioner Clement that we shouldn't approve the change in GLUP without making clear in some way what the transportation plan should be for the area. And also, I will admit I agree with the Shirlington Civic Association that this is an area that can support additional density, and the more people that are in places where they can walk to restaurants and walk to the Harris Teeter, the better for Arlington County. So that's it. Should this motion fail, that would be the motion that I would prefer to make in its stead. Any other discussion of the motion amongst commissioners? All righty then.
I was going to ask what the alternative was, so thank you.
Yeah.
The world is our oyster. We can put forth any motion that we want.
Yeah, I was
that's
sort of
what
throwing out that we could support it, given with a caveat that we will support it if it allows additional density and if it addresses public transit more robustly than it does now. One of the complaints that WETA raised is that their employees can't get from the district to Shirlington easily by bus. And that's something that isn't in this right now. And that's a data point that has been raised in this very context. I think we need to recognize that. So I think it was well taken that I think it was Commissioner Rich was raising that, okay, we have a lot of the buses here, but where do they go? Where do they come from? I think that's a very valid point. I think there was discussion about pedestrian circulation. Maybe that could be a little more robust also. But, I could say we could go ahead and support this if there's additional density permitted and if there's additional discussion about transportation non-vehicular transportation improvements, such as bicycle access, bus access to residential and employment nodes throughout the region, and pedestrian circulation.
Any other discussion of the motion before us?
I think there's a lot of ifs mounting up here.
You could still withdraw it.
Actually, once it's seconded, it belongs to the whole commission. It's
Okay.
not Commissioner Buck's motion anymore. We actually have to vote on it.
I will be voting against my own motion, I will say.
That actually gives me a nice opportunity here to say, does anyone plan to vote for the motion? Is anyone voting for the motion before us? Just say it real quick if you are. Okay, so that motion just dies and we don't have to go through name by name, and that saves us all time. All right, in that case, I would like to move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the county board defer approval of the Shirlington Special GLUP study, pending further refinement of non-motorized modes of transportation, the recommendations on non-motorized modes of transportation, and the potential to support additional density in Shirlington.
Second.
Is there any discussion of that motion?
That pretty much takes care of it.
Okay. Let's go to a vote then. Commissioner Clement.
Aye.
Oh, hold on. I've done this wrong. I'm actually not set up to record your votes in my sheet here just yet. My apologies. Okay, Clement is aye. Commissioner Yeri.
Aye.
Commissioner Buck.
Aye.
Commissioner Raddick.
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Aye.
Commissioner Brose.
Aye.
Commissioner Wadsworth.
Aye.
I am an aye. Commissioner Rich.
Aye.
Commissioner Price.
Aye.
All right. Did any new commissioners arrive on the call since our last vote that I've missed? All right, then that is unanimous. And that is the commission's action on the Shirlington GLUP study. I would suggest that the commission take a brief 5-minute break before the next item is called in case anybody needs a beverage or to use the restroom or that sort of thing. So we will reconvene approximately 9:30 for the rest of our business. It's been 5 minutes by my watch. Can you go ahead and call the next item?
The next item is item number 4. This is the Neighborhood Complete Streets Program update, and this is an action item. And we have both staff and also the chair of the Neighborhood Complete Streets Commission. Welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Sure can.
Hi, this is Elisa Ortiz, chair of the commission. Michelle, do you want to say hi?
Hi there, this is Michelle Stafford. I work with Richard in transportation planning as the program coordinator for Neighborhood Complete Streets.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for our PowerPoint. One moment. Oh, there we go. Okay, one second. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So hi, everyone, and good evening. Thank you for having us at the meeting tonight. Hopefully this item will be a little shorter than your last couple. So if you all remember in those halcyon days before the COVID-19 pandemic got going, the Neighborhood Complete Streets Commission came to you all to give you some information about where we were in terms of our work and to give you an update about an action item we were going to bring to you. Of course, our intention was to bring the action item a lot sooner than we did, but you know, things being as they are, here we are finally with our action item. So just want to quickly recap what we shared with you before and then ask hopefully for some action on this. So we are sort of dealing with 2 different categories of things. First is proposed Neighborhood Complete Streets capital projects. And this slide goes over the 2 projects. So we have 2 projects right now that are at 30% design. We've already engaged in public participation and public engagement. So the first project is 13th Street South between Walter Reed and South Highland in the Douglas Park neighborhood. And I know it's a tiny little image, but you can just see in orange right here, the section of the street we're talking about. So this was nominated and was ranked very highly on our list of Complete Streets projects because there's no complete sidewalk on either side of the street. And right here, actually, you can kind of see there's this portion of something you might call a sidewalk if you were being extraordinarily generous, but is really just kind of an at-grade strip of differently colored concrete. And then further down here, if you could actually see that, there's a traffic circle. There's some on-street parking. So there's sort of a number of issues that make this section of the street not super safe for multimodal users. And so we're looking at adding a short, or the proposal looks to add a short portion of sidewalk to make up for where we're not getting it here to help complete this street, and possibly also doing some other work with art to, like if you were looking behind you in this image, to add a bus platform at this place on Walter Reed. So this is the first project, and we can answer any, of course, more detailed questions about this if you'd like, but remembering that it's still a little bit early in the design process, but we're looking for your approval ideally, and then to go to the board before we actually have our own funding hearing next week. The second project is 7th Road South, and you can see kind of the little sketch here between South Dinwiddie Street to South Greenbrier Street in the Arlington Mill neighborhood. So this segment has a history of speeding, history of crashes, plus there's a large volume of vehicles. It's a heavy transit route and adjacent to a park. And so these are the reasons why it was identified again as a high-level project, high-ranked project on our list. And we're looking here for this project for an intersection improvement at Florida, plus a new bump-out platform at the park that would help, again, complete the street partly, again, in collaboration with art for sure for this one, that already did some work making part of this segment more accessible and more friendly for bus riders in particular. And so this, working with them, we will help to make that available on both sides of the street. So that's the first segment of our work, and we'll come to the action at the end. But just to sort of recap, we next week, the Neighborhood Complete Streets Commission is having our own funding hearing to take a look at these projects and then also our program documents, which is next. And so, welcome any thoughts you all have once we're done with the presentation. So the second part of what we're coming to you to share and ask for your feedback on is proposed changes to our program. So as we mentioned when we came to see you all back at the very beginning of March, is that the commission had worked via some subcommittees to update all of our program documents. So that would include our original charter, the program guide that guides our work, and then the project ranking guidelines by which we obviously rank projects. So for this slide outlines some of the changes that were made. The charter was changed pretty minimally. That document, I believe, was drafted in either 2013 or 2014. So it just didn't reflect what our current practices are. So we just did a couple updates and specifically named a position from the Pedestrian Advisory Committee to sit on our commission. In terms of the program guide, this was much more substantial edits. Again, the document was originally drafted probably in 2015. And so it reflected what we thought at the time before actually launching the program and working it for a few years, what we would do and how it would guide our work. And so we decided it just needed a lot of updates. So it's really a lot shorter now and much more streamlined and relies much more heavily on existing county documentation to, sort of shore up what we're doing. In particular, focusing on using the 6-step guide for public engagement around capital projects and just leaning on that since it's a established policy now in the county. And then also we identified 2 different tracks for our projects, and this is probably the most relevant update, or the most sort of impactful update. So what we discussed as a commission is that in the beginning stages of our work a couple years ago, we actually did a couple of pilot projects, which I mentioned the last time we spoke. And these, we called them pilot projects at the time, but they were like very quick hit, cheap measures that could be deployed on some critical intersections and to just help make a change and make things a little more safe for folks that were using them. And so we didn't want to lose the ability to do short, fast turnaround, cheaper projects like that because we don't have a big budget, but we could actually get a lot of those done, and we might actually be able to make some good complete streets improvements, at least incrementally, by doing those. So we created that as kind of a track of projects. And then the other track would be what we're talking to you about tonight, which would be capital projects. So like a little bit more intensive in terms of the interventions being used, probably a little more expensive, a bit, just a lot more, more permanent measures likely. And so we added those 2 tracks. And then the only other thing I'll say about this is that we also made specific that just because a project is in a tactical track doesn't mean it won't be considered for a capital project track later. And then the project ranking guidelines, there's a lot of changes we made to that. And so I'll just quickly go through them. Briefly, there's a lot of different changes we made, and these are a little complicated. This was definitely the bulk of our conversation, but one of our biggest goals is to objectively rank all projects based on metrics that are both very clear and have clear rationale behind them, but also that are for many of these don't require. We want to be able to evaluate them relatively quickly and be able to do a desktop analysis or have staff do a desktop analysis. So a couple of changes. We changed this section A here in sidewalk conditions to kind of break these out. So if you have no complete sidewalk, you get the most points in this section, but you can also get points for having a narrow or obstructed sidewalk and missing curb ramps. So that's kind of a plus on the whole thing. We did some edits here in the traffic hazards and safety section to reflect crashes, and this is sort of feeding into the Vision Zero conversation as well. But to talk about the fact that you get points for having crashes, period, but that crashes with a physical injury are much more severe, and we wanted to sort of give, for lack of a better word, credit. If somebody's gotten hurt it's if they've gotten seriously injured, they get even more points. So that basically you can qualify for just the basic level of evaluation here. This is our first level, just by having a crash, because that's serious enough. Just by having a crash with a physical injury, because that is serious enough to warrant looking at. And then we made some adjustments here to our speed and volume criteria, just adjusting some traffic volume stuff, and how much points a project gets for a speeding problem. And finally, we broke these in this section. We broke these out into 2 different sections. Previously, this was all one section. So quickly, other changes to the evaluation criteria. So the way our evaluation works is that once you get past these metrics, and if you have high enough points, you have to have a minimum group 1 A plus B plus C of 12 points, then you get bumped to the second level, where the projects are evaluated on all these criteria. And so we made a bunch of like little adjustments here, just either breaking out some of these things. I think maybe shopping/office and civic building might have been in one category. Sorry, it's been a long time for me too since we talked about this as a commission. And then we changed the point values and some of the max totals you could get, either upped or went down on some of these point values. So like slightly less tweaks here. And then in the end, what happens is that you get group 1 and group 2 added, and that becomes your final point evaluation, and then you get ranked against the other projects. So all of that is hopefully you remember this conversation from a couple months ago, but the requested actions we're actually asking from the Transportation Commission is to recommend first that the Arlington County Board approve project funding to proceed with the 2 proposed NCS capital projects. And 2, recommend that the Arlington County Board accept the revised NCS program guide, NCS project ranking guidelines, and NCSC charter. So the motions, should you be ready to make them, are handily here for you, so you don't have to worry about wording them yourself. Aren't we sweet? So I will pause on this slide and take any questions.
All right. Thank you very much, former Commissioner Ortiz.
I know.
And thank you for all of your hard work. And thank you for your quick hit tactical project on 6th Street South in Penrose. I've used it many times during COVID. Let's see. I don't see any hands in the team. Oh, wait, there's in the chat. Yes, Commissioner Brose, you're up.
So I just want to commend Elisa and Michelle. I also sit on the commission with both of them, and I just want to commend Elisa, especially on these on number 2, on all the work that they did with a small working group to look at the program guide, the ranking guidelines, and the charter. When I joined the commission 2 years ago, I think it was at this point, we were really hitting a wall in terms of some of the ranking criteria, and these suggestions just make it so much easier and so much more, I think, appropriate criteria for the work that we really want to get done and prioritize projects. And I think you heard there are hundreds of projects that were recommended, but the 2 that we're recommending approval, I think, really are 2 that are going to make a big difference in the neighborhoods. And so I would recommend our support for those.
Commissioner Buck, you're up next.
I just want to say I definitely support the projects. They're very necessary, and the screening criteria are really great. They're so great that I kind of wish that we had a countywide inventory of sidewalks, and we're screening and prioritizing them in a similar way. And as far as I know, we don't. It seems like we have this really rigorous, good, well thought out screening criteria to fund what are there seem to be a lot of sidewalk projects that are proposed under this program, and I'm wondering if I could get your sort of non-binding reaction to the idea that maybe someday the NCSC program has sidewalks at a bare minimum, for example, for a street that has no sidewalks. If there's a bare minimum standard of sidewalk, that a sidewalk program countywide takes on, and NCSC takes on other aspects outside of sidewalks.
Interesting question. So I'll say a couple things. One is that first of all, we have like 130 projects on our list. So it's a good chance we've hit a lot of the sidewalks or parts of the county that might be missing things. Like I said, the list is huge, and I will just quickly say that when and if these criteria, the evaluation criteria, are approved for edits, staff will take the lead on reevaluating the whole list against this evaluation criteria. So it'll also make it clearer. I mean, the list is currently online on the NCSC Commission's or NCS Commission's website. So you can look at what it looks like now. Of course, it might change. So that might give you a good sense of where we might be missing sidewalks. The second thing I'll say is that we are exclusively focused on neighborhood streets, so non-arterial streets. So there's as you actually think Mr. Leach even mentioned it, the county has a separate complete streets program for the arterial streets, and so we don't touch those, and that's not our purview. So we're only focused on neighborhood streets. The third thing I'll say is, I mean, the essence of a complete street, sidewalks are certainly an incredibly important part of that, but one of the things I think is great about this program is that we're trying to look at the street in a bit more of a holistic way to make sure that the street is accessible, safe, and comfortable for all sorts of users. And again, sidewalks are certainly a huge part of that. But, our projects, of course, we're bounded by money constraints, as all are, but our projects have tried to be really responsive to what's needed in a particular area. And so this hasn't really happened yet, but I could anticipate that we might look at things like lighting in a community, or things like, of course, the sidewalks themselves. But, of course, it's all kinds of other things. You heard I was talking about one of the 7th Road South is looking at really making the bus facility better there. I mean, there's a great sidewalk there, but like the bus facility isn't as great. So I think this program allows us to be a little bit more inclusive of other things we can do. But I mean, I definitely hear and agree with your concern about like having an inventory about sidewalks around the county. I think the county staff have done a really good job. And of course, in the master transportation plan, there is guidance about what the county's goals are in terms of what sidewalks should look like. On neighborhood streets, it's like one side of the street should have a complete sidewalk. And we're trying to address that. I mean, I would always welcome the Transportation Commission's advocacy on behalf of getting more money for the Neighborhood Complete Streets Commission and our program so that we can continue to do more work. So that's all I'll say about that.
Awesome. Thank you, former Commissioner Ortiz. Teams, come on, teams. Commissioner Clement, you're up next.
Yes, well, first I want to compliment and thank former Commissioner Ortiz because number one, this project was professionally presented. Number two, it was presented twice. So that means that it gave commissioners an opportunity to think about its content and to come back here able to make an informed decision. And number three, and this is the most important thing, it was concise. And remember Shakespeare, I know we all value that great man. He said, brevity is the soul of wit. And this very most definitely meets that criteria. Over.
All right, Commissioner Yuri, you're up next.
All right, thank you. I just want to start before I say what I'm going to say. I love this program a lot, and I really do support the projects that are coming through it. However, I'm curious about why do we use the phrase neighborhood for non-arterial streets? Because as somebody who lives on an arterial street and lives on an arterial street with, I'm going to guess, at least 1,000 other people within 2 blocks of me, I would strongly disagree with the notion that my street is not a neighborhood street. And I would really, at some point, when we use the phrase like neighborhood conservation, neighborhood complete streets, and other things that treat neighborhoods as being very leafy green pieces of land in the county, I'd like to remind folks that like language really does matter about how we talk about the places where people live. And at some point down the road, I'd really like to reconsider how we use the word neighborhood in Arlington County.
Thank you. Well, I'll just say that the name comes directly from the MTP in terms of how the county classifies the streets. So I think Michelle can correct me, we're neighborhood, non-arterial, I can't remember the exact designations. There's two kinds of streets that this commission focuses on. Michelle, can you help me out with that?
Yeah, so I think often the phrase local or the word local is used interchangeably with neighborhood, but we are referring to the street typology on the MTP map. But I think there are, in the language in the MTP, there's reference to different types of neighborhood streets, and I think there's neighborhood local and neighborhood connectors, but we only work as on the white streets on the map. I try and use the color coding when I deal with applicants to keep it really simple, and it is referred to as neighborhood to my knowledge. But I would welcome that comment about how we frame our reference to our streets when we ever get to the point when we are updating the master transportation plan. That is an excellent contextual point.
I would add one other comment because I, agree with what you're saying. That I think one thing for you to keep in mind and to know about a program, you're right. The words, the context we use is really important. But also, one of the I think critical things for me about this program is that it's not exclusively driven by the neighborhood civic associations. Certainly they are an important element of our public engagement. And there's plenty of projects on our list that were recommended by civic associations. But it's in a slight contrast to the neighborhood conservation program. Any individual in the county, you don't have to be associated with an organization, can nominate a street, and actually staff can nominate streets for the list as well. So in how we've constructed the program, we've tried to be as inclusive as possible, but your comments well taken.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner questions or comments on this matter before us? Seeing none, I move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the Arlington County Board approve project funding to proceed with the two proposed NCS capital projects, and that the Commission recommend that the County Board accept the revised NCS program guide, NCS project ranking guidelines, and the NCSC charter.
Second.
I'll second it.
Any discussion of that motion? All right, seeing none, I will prepare my little vote tracking list here. Commissioner Clement.
Well, I support the motion. Yes.
All right, Commissioner Yeri.
Aye.
Commissioner Buck.
Aye.
Commissioner Raddick.
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Aye.
Commissioner Brose.
Aye.
Commissioner Wadsworth.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Commissioner Rich.
Aye.
Commissioner Price.
Aye.
All right, that's unanimous. Thank you very much for sticking with us through the prior two items and for all of your hard work on this excellent
Appreciate it.
program.
Next time, put us at the front of the agenda. And thank you, commissioners. You all have a great night and a wonderful Independence Day holiday.
Thank you. You too.
And our next item is item number 5. This is the VDOT Smart Scale Projects. This is an action item. Rich Roisman is from staff is here to make a presentation, I believe.
Good evening, commissioners. Can you all hear me and or see me?
Yes.
Excellent. Good evening. Let me share my screen. I do not have a PowerPoint, but I will bring up a copy of the draft staff report, which you all should have received in your packet. This item is for authorization for the county to submit applications to the Commonwealth for the Round 4 Smart Scale program. In the interest of brevity, I will not go through the background of the program except to say that it is large and popular and always oversubscribed. It is also important to keep in mind that the awards for Smart Scale are far in the future. In this case, the awards for Round 4 will be given in fiscal 26 and 27. Staff is proposing applying for 3 projects, which I will go through briefly, for a total grant application of $69.1 million. The 3 projects that we are recommending are first, safety improvements along Arlington Boulevard between Glebe Road and Fillmore Street. This is coming out of a soon-to-be completed VDOT safety study called the STARS study. And there are details about some of the basic sections of the typical section that's being recommended and is deemed the most popular out of that study. But it would physically separate the carriageways for Arlington Boulevard, as well as add new turn lanes at Irving Street and extend the turn lane going westbound to southbound Fillmore. Second, and that's a cost of $20 million. Second project is the Courthouse Metro second elevator. I do want to make a slight correction to the draft report here. High-speed elevators are desirable for this project, as anyone who has ridden the existing courthouse elevator and then ridden the new ones in Roslyn. However, the determination for high-speed needs to be worked out in the detailed design work with WMATA. So the high-speed modifier will be struck from the final report. But it would put in a second elevator and basically try to put 2 elevators in an expanded shaft in the current location down to the mezzanine level. Per ADA guidelines, there would be shuttle bus operating during construction to make sure that there's still continued access to and from the station. And that is an estimated cost of $29.1 million. The third and final project to propose for application in this round of Smart Scale is trail enhancements to the Mount Vernon Trail on the north side. This is an application which we are sponsoring, but the work would be done via passing funding through to the National Park Service, who own and operate the Mount Vernon Trail. This would cover sections within Arlington and within the city of Alexandria, and the Alexandria City Council has passed a resolution of support for this application last week. So, because the Smart Scale funding is 100% state, or it's a combination of federal and state aid, but there's no local match requirement, there's no fiscal impact to us making these applications. The Courthouse Metro second elevator is within the adopted 2019 to 2028 CIP. The other 2 projects, our hope is that the Arlington Boulevard project would be a VDOT administered project since it's on their roadway. And then the Mount Vernon Trail project would be done primarily by the Park Service. So whether or not they show up in an update of the CIP, because they're not truly county projects, remains to be seen. But they would, there's not necessarily going to be any local money on the books for them either way. We are looking for a motion this evening from the Transportation Commission to support the county manager's recommendation that the county board authorize these 3 applications to round 4 Smart Scale. And at that point, I will stop and take any questions from commissioners.
All right, Commissioner Lantelmi is quick on the button with his hand up. Go ahead, Commissioner Lantelmi.
Thank you. Yeah, the question I have is on Arlington Boulevard. Arlington Boulevard, it cuts county in half. It's a very, very wide right-of-way. It's more than just a traffic way. It also has, the bike trail and other sort of side streets and side uses, but it's ugly as sin. There's absolutely no consistent design from one end of it to the other. Parts of it are a freeway, parts of it are this big, ugly slab of asphalt. Other parts are almost park-like because of all the trees. Are we having any sort of, right now we're doing traffic improvements. Is there any thought to having actual design improvements to make it a real place rather than just a sluice way for traffic? And I'm thinking of something like Eastern Parkway in New York or Commonwealth Avenue in Boston, or even Upper Broadway in Manhattan, Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn. There are really gracious-looking streets that are very wide and are used for traffic, but actually have a sense of place. And I'm not getting the feeling that we're doing anything as far as making this something we really want to look at. Do you have any? I'm supporting the money on it, and I think it's worth doing, but I'd really like to have some sort of honest to God design thought put into this. I don't know if Chris Kreider's still on the line or not, but anyway, that's my comment on those. And is there any design thought to this?
At this point, this project is simply to address the safety and some operational improvements in this stretch of Arlington Boulevard. We in regional planning have discussed several times internally looking at a broader corridor study, which would include the sections inside the Beltway in Fairfax County, to look at sort of common, a common approach to looking at it as a corridor, which I think would have room for doing some design upgrades. But as of now, that is not on the table.
I just have a quick question. So this is a STARS project, which is a strategically targeted affordable roadway solutions.
Yes.
Is $20 million typical the sort of budget we see come out of an affordable transportation project track?
I have some understanding of other STAR studies that have been done in Northern Virginia. I think they tend to be all across the state, some in less urban areas. So I think you're seeing something that is probably toward the high end of what comes out of one of those studies. But we're dealing in in an urban environment with as previous commissioner pointed out, a fairly wide, currently open section portion of roadway that needs to be treated appropriately and converted to closed section to make sure you get the separation, do the safety improvements, maintain the trails on either side, et cetera. So there are some add-ons which the county elected to put in their pre-application, which are going to carry forward, including bus stop improvements and some street lighting improvements, which are not part of the STAR study. So those add on. But even with the estimates that are within the STAR study, I think those topped out in a range. The top end of the range was close to $17 or $18 million. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Clement, I think your hand's up next.
Yes. Well, first of all, I absolutely do support this project. In fact, I remember a couple years ago, an Arlington civic activist, almost the week or a few days before she passed away, testified before County Board to do something about the intersection of Arlington Boulevard and Irving Street, and she pointed to, I think, at least one fatality. But my question is this: what is the likelihood of any of these projects getting funded, and at what level do you expect them to get funded?
We look carefully before selecting projects to go through for any of the external grant programs, and we focus on those that we think both make sense for what's in the county's plans and policies, but also those that we think have the greatest chance of success in the funding program. One of the advantages, particularly about the Arlington Boulevard study, is that because it is the project is resulting from a VDOT funded study, that linkage has been there in other sources where results of a STAR study have led to a defined smart scale project. So VDOT encouraged the county from the get-go to look at smart scale as a possible funding source for what was coming out of the STAR study. So we wouldn't be proposing these for submittal if we didn't think they were competitive.
Commissioner Buck. All right. While we wait for Commissioner Buck, Commissioner Price.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Good. Thank you for the presentation. I guess I had a question. I know you said, well, we all know Smart Scale is very much an oversubscribed program. There's lots of needs and very limited dollars out there. But if this is a VDOT study, have we even thought about asking VDOT to actually do this work and take the 20 million and thus allow us to apply and use or make an application for another project? I'd be curious as to what projects didn't make it on this list now that we have this Arlington Boulevard project there. So like what was number 4 and 5 that were under consideration? And this is something that that VDOT can fund themselves.
Our preference with any improvement coming out of a VDOT study within Arlington County is that VDOT fund it themselves and implement it. However, that's not the model that they're working under anymore. Their resource constraints tend to result in studies going and then them having recommend that the locality seek funds from any other sources. There's no problem with getting the Smart Scale Award and then passing it back to VDOT. That's there, but they are, just as with other recent studies that have been concluded, for example, the Shirlington Circle study, VDOT is not coming forth with funds to implement any of the recommendations coming out. So we've got to go after them through other sources. Having said that, we submitted 4 pre-applications for Smart Scale, and we're only proposing to advance 3 of them. The project that is not being advanced from pre-application to application is what we're now calling the Arlington National Cemetery Wall Trail, which is the former Route 110 trail, but now on the cemetery side of the roadway. And that's not to say that fell by the wayside because we're advancing Arlington Boulevard instead. Arlington Boulevard is a very significant priority due to the crash history and safety and operational concerns about the roadway. The reason we're submitting the Mount Vernon Trail instead is because we don't think the Commonwealth is likely to fund 2 trail projects within Northern Virginia with Smart Scale, and the Mount Vernon Trail is by far is an existing trail with much heavier use and is more important to get that rehab and expansion both within Arlington County and Alexandria, and therefore takes higher priority over the Wall Trail.
Thank you, Rich.
Commissioner Buck, are you back and available?
I think I am. I've got some real heartache with this project, even independent of what other better projects it might be squeezing out. It's been couched as a safety study. It's a widening. It's a highway widening. It's blowing out from what is now 6 to 7 lanes to 7 to 8 lanes. At the same time, we have I-66 widening inside the Beltway. As part of the traffic analysis, at any point did they look at the possibility of deviations and how much more volume this may attract off of the I-66 priced facility?
They looked at deviations to the local streets where they're allowing turn access. They did not do a comparison between US 50 and I-66. However, I don't think, given the level of improvements, which again are primarily for safety and operations, adding turn lanes, and it is a widening in that to move to closed section, there will likely be some property impacts to move to closed section and to do stormwater pieces, but the number of through lanes is not increasing. It will still be 3 and 3, but you'll have the added benefit of having a dedicated turn lane at Irving and then having the median preventing some of the crashes that are occurring for people making left turns on some of the side streets where there's no dedicated turn lane in the current open section. I don't think that's going to make Route 50 so much more attractive that you'll see people diverting from there, even with the tolls on I-66. It just seems highly unlikely.
Sure. It is a capacity improvement, though. It improves travel times. It makes the 3rd through lane, the 2 inside through lanes that VDOT acknowledges are very underused now because they're reserved basically for permissive left turns. Those become fully saturated through lanes. And this is, while it's not a widening in the sense of adding through lanes, the operational improvement is it has the possibility of pumping cars faster or pumping more cars, depending on how regional travel patterns change.
Yeah, that's correct.
So I emailed VDOT in early May and never got a response, asking if they analyzed a 5-lane cross-section. 5-lane cross-section would allow for medians, would allow for the 2 effective through lanes, which is how the road operates today, and presumably allow a level of service that's relatively unchanged from today, while offering the safety benefits of left turn lanes and a narrower cross-section to allow shorter crossings for pedestrians and bicyclists, and potentially some more right-of-way available for use for permeable land, for trail, for streetscape, whatever. I never got a substantive response from VDOT. Was Arlington DES working with VDOT on scoping this study, and was that ever considered or analyzed?
We were not involved in the scoping. We came in at the beginning of the study after it had largely already been scoped. To my knowledge, either a smaller cross section and we heard some public comments about this, nor looking at a speed study or lowering the speed limit were considered as options in any part of the study. In terms of your feedback from VDOT, I mean, they're in the process of wrapping up the study. We could talk offline about who you emailed, and I can follow up with them to see if there's a response pending, because that part does concern me.
I guess in the future, I have a little bit of a selfish interest here in that VDOT's going to back up a dump truck full of $200 million of streetscape on Route 1 in my neighborhood, and thus far county staff have said they really have no intention of being involved in that study other than providing technical resources. Is this the future of our coordination with VDOT, where they recommend a highway widening and we submit a funding application to fund it?
Well, I think there's still a lot of detailed design left to be done on this project, for which we will have much closer coordination with them once it becomes an actual project. But there's only so much that can be done, to get to the point where you're able to submit a grant application. So then and unfortunately, given the lack of funding, that is the model for anything where we're working with an external grant where the award date is 5 years or more out. So that's simply the nature of the funding system at this time.
I'll yield the floor in case anybody else has more questions.
Anybody else want to jump in here? I'm not seeing. Oh, there, Commissioner Raddick.
I believe somewhere in this document on this item, it said something about VDOT doesn't allow modifications after approval, or very few modifications. Did I remember reading that, Mr. Roisman?
I don't think so. I mean, there's the amount of modifications, I guess, are relative to largely cost. I mean, they're concerned about cost controls, and so if there is a scope modification for a smart scale awarded project that raises the cost significantly, then it potentially needs to go back to be rescoped and reevaluated. So it depends on the nature of the modification.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in here and say I share a lot of Commissioner Buck's concerns about this project in particular. I don't feel like the appropriate options were looked at during the safety study. I agree that there are safety problems in this area, especially the crossing at Irving. Yeah, those inside through lanes are carrying very few cars right now because people know that people are going to be stopped in them trying to turn left. And I'm concerned that we are moving ahead with this funding application when A, VDOT hasn't actually finalized what this study is saying they should do. B, that we haven't had much chance to hear from the community their reaction to whatever VDOT's conclusions end up being. C, that they never looked at a 5-lane cross section, which I think would improve quality of life significantly in this area. And I'm pretty sure I had a fourth one, but my mind has gone completely sideways right now. Yeah, I mean, especially in a time right now of limited, limited money. One of my questions is like, why this study and not the Shirlington Circle study, which you brought up? Is there a plan for funding Shirlington Circle, because that at least has a lot of community support?
I can't speak to the lack of or a funding plan for Shirlington Circle at this point. It'll be evaluated with everything else when we do the next CIP update for sure.
All right, Commissioner Buck again.
I just wanted to chime in. I think one of my remaining concerns is advancing to your list, Chris. Advancing a project for construction and design funding that we don't know the chosen option of yet. I mean, we see where they're leaning, we see what the tea leaves say, but gosh, that's unusual in my experience that we're submitting an application for a construction project that we don't have a chosen alternative for yet.
Yeah, and I did finally remember what my fourth was, which is anytime we're talking about widening, I think we need to be talking about tree impacts. And in nowhere in VDOT's study have I seen any laying out of what the property acts that property impacts that you spoke of would be, or what the tree impacts would be of this widening. Commissioner Clement, I think you're up next.
Yes, well, yeah, I am very impressed with Mr. Buck's remarks and also your own. And my question would be with regards to this motion. Can we approve the other two and ask deferral of this one?
We can certainly recommend that the board submit the other two projects for smart scale, but not recommend that they submit Arlington Boulevard for smart scale, or at least not at this time, or something like that.
Well, I would definitely, based on your remarks and Mr. Buck's remarks, I would go with that.
All right. Does anybody else have questions for Mr. Roisman or comments for the good of the order? Oh, wait, somebody is in here. Commissioner Rich.
Hey, just want to chime in agreement with pretty much everything that's already been said. And that if the issue here is safety, I am very unconvinced that this design will improve safety. I think it, in all likelihood, will make safety a lot worse on this stretch. And I also believe the 5-lane alternative would be much safer.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rich. Anybody else on this one? All right, then I move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the Arlington County Board submit for smart scale funding the Courthouse Metro Second Elevator Project and the Mount Vernon Trail North Enhancements Project, but to not submit the Arlington Boulevard Safety Improvements Project for smart scale funding at this time due to lack of clarity around the final recommendation and whether it is in fact the best solution for this area.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
I think I'll just say that I think having lived in that neighborhood for 5 years, this is a really critical spot that needs safe attention. I feel a little, I think I'll vote for the motion, but I feel like we should be getting some money out there and coming up with a design that works. So that's why I'm supportive. But again, I'm a little hesitant to defer the request for cash because I know the situation for money here in the state. So.
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from, Commissioner Brose. I fully agree that there are safety problems here. I'm just really afraid we're going to get locked into the wrong and overly expensive solution.
Yeah, no, I understand the motion. So thanks.
Anything else? Oh.
Chairman Slatt, would it be wise to maybe in the transmittal letter to the board note that we think that coordinating with VDOT on clarifying what the options are and coming up with if there are short-term changes that are possible to encourage DES to pursue those opportunities. Because I don't think anybody doubts that there's definitely a need for safety improvements here. But to your point, I think we don't have a lot of confidence that the study was scoped appropriately.
Based on the comments already given, that was the framing I intended to include in the letter. Anybody else? Alrighty then.
Sorry.
Let's go.
A comment on one of the other projects actually, because we got so into Route 50. I am not sure. I would like to know how possible it might be for us to address the Mount Vernon Trail and suggest that pedestrians and cyclists be separated along that line.
Is that question directed to staff?
I suppose so. Yeah.
I mean, the Park Service just concluded a comprehensive study of the Mount Vernon Trail in May that is out for comment, and the the medium to long-term capital improvements are coming right out of that to go into the smart scale application for the sections within Arlington and Alexandria. I have taken a look at the study and don't know the full availability of right-of-way or constraints in right-of-way along the full section of trail, but I suspect that is probably a limiting factor in attempting to segregate bikes and pedestrians, is the availability of doing a full widening along certain segments of trail. So.
Yeah, I'm disinclined to add any additional to this motion, and would encourage people to definitely comment on the Mount Vernon Trail Corridor study. It's NPS, like anything they do is going to require some sort of massive environmental process. So there will be additional time to weigh in on that, I'm sure. Any other discussion of the motion? Commissioner Price.
Just one thing, Mr. Chairman, are we going to include in our letter a request that they, for this particular application, add a project? I mean, we're considering asking for a total amount of about $69 million. And if they were to approve our motion, I agree with our motion, but if we were to approve it, we'd be asking them for 49 million, right? 49.1 million. Do we want to encourage the board to seek an additional project as part of its application?
Let me respond to that. The only other application which would be considered would be the Arlington National Cemetery Wall Trail. You cannot advance for full application smart scale something that has not been screened in as a pre-application.
Okay.
Anybody else? All right, then we will call the vote. Commissioner Clement, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Yeri?
Aye.
Commissioner Buck?
Aye.
Commissioner Raddick?
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi?
Aye.
Commissioner Brose?
Aye.
Commissioner Wadsworth?
Aye.
I also vote aye. Wow, that's really awkward to say. Commissioner Rich?
Aye.
And Commissioner Price?
Aye.
All right, that is unanimous. Thank you very much, Mr. Roisman.
Thank you
for answering our many, many questions.
Certainly.
Item 6 is other business. The only thing that staff has is our next meeting is August 27th, which is technically the September meeting. And it will probably most likely be in the Teams format. So as we had this evening.
All right, and then I wanted to bring up, I've definitely heard from multiple commissioners over the course of the last few months that there is a desire to discuss with county staff about the potential for reconfiguring streets temporarily in response to COVID to ensure that people have appropriate space to walk and to bike safely. And some general dissatisfaction with the amount or the complete lack of that we've seen from the county. I wanted to take the commission's temperature. Is this something that you would like me to try and get on the agenda and get a staff presentation on in a quickly upcoming meeting?
Yes.
Yes from me.
Yes, absolutely, 100%,
Okay.
no doubt.
All right, Mr. Best, let's talk about that offline.
We will do that.
All righty. Anything else for the good of the order?
I had a request from a friend of ours to encourage people to engage with the APS transportation work that's going on. I believe APS has a commission devoted to school transportation, and I was asked to throw in a plug for that work.
I actually believe that's ACTC, the something transportation choices, and I believe Commissioner Wadsworth is our current rep to that committee. And last I'd heard, he was having trouble making that time commitment and is interested in gifting that to someone else who can give it the time and attention that it deserves. Commissioner Wadsworth, is that still the case?
Yes, I would be very honored and privileged to gift it to someone. It's an important topic, but I just cannot make the meetings.
All right, so if you're interested in that, shoot me an email. You all have it. Anything else for the good of the order?
Good to see you all.
I'd like to
Happy
thank
4th of
you
July.
all for an extremely, I think, efficient virtual meeting. Everybody did a great job with the raising of the hand and the chatting. Commissioner Price did actually put his finger up in the air and lucked out that he happened to be on camera. If he had not been in my grid of 9, I would not have called on him, so keep that in mind. And I suspect we will see each other like this again in August. Thank you all for your hard work. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Best.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Best.